I'd like to welcome you all to the Navigating the Pediatric Lupus Journey webinar series, part 4, Living Your Best Life. This is the last webinar in our 4-part series, and we will focus on the non-medical parts of treating lupus and you, including a look at the social determinants of health, complementary medicine, nutrition, exercise, and other ways to stay healthy while living with lupus. Parts 1, 2, and 3 can be found on our website, and we'll put the link to those in our chat. If you're not from the Tri-State chapter, you probably can also find those on your local chapter's website as well. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started with the program. We're really happy that you're able to join us this evening. We're going to start out our presentation with Dr. Austin Dalrymple, followed by a panel discussion. If you do have questions during any parts of the program, please use the chat or the Q&A feature. Unfortunately, we will not be able to answer any specific or individual treatment or diagnosis questions. If you do have questions following this program, be sure to reach out to your local chapter or directly to your physician. You can also address follow-up questions to us at the Philadelphia Tri-State chapter, which is info@lupustristate.org. Which we'll put that in the chat for you as well. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available at your local LFA chapter's website shortly after this program. And if you're part of the Tri-State chapter, it will also be on our website. Now let's go ahead and get started. And Dr. Dalrymple, if you want to go ahead and bring you on, share your camera. Awesome. Okay, so we're thrilled to have our keynote speaker with us. Dr. Austin Dalrymple is a pediatric rheumatologist at SSM Health Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital and an assistant professor of pediatrics at St. Louis University School of Medicine. He completed his undergraduate studies at Pittsburgh State University and medical school at Kansas City University of Medicine and Biosciences College of Osteopathic Medicine. You went to colleges with long names, Dr. Dalrymple. Yeah, his work focuses on patient care as well as education of medical students, pediatric residents, and rheumatology fellows. His research interests include the evaluation of biomarkers in JIA and exploring the barriers to patients and families arriving at medical visits. So thank you so much for being here tonight, Dr. Dalrymple, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Cindy. Let me share my screen here. Okay, there we go. Are we good there on your end?
Yes, looks perfect.
Okay, all right. So thank you again, Cindy, for that introduction. And I'm adjusting my screen here. So thanks everybody for tuning in this evening. Hopefully I'll share some thoughts that also get you thinking about how else you can approach your health and living with lupus. So here we go. So here's a brief outline for tonight. We're going to talk about and introduce what are the social determinants of health and how do they impact our health. We're going to talk about CAM, complementary and alternative medicine. We will also touch on nutrition and exercise. What on earth does staying healthy mean and how can we think about that? And then also how do we adapt the family to a diagnosis of lupus, and also some issues regarding reproductive health as well. Okay, so we are of course more than just our disease, right? I think if you ask any human on the planet, they're going to say that we are all more than one thing. And we're, I think a common answer would be we're, our body, our mind, and our spirit. So much of medicine is focused on our body and the health of our body. We have other professionals, mental health professionals, that help us with the health of our mind. And we have yet other people in our lives and other professionals that help us with our spirit. So taking a step back from lupus itself, thinking more globally, more holistically, more head to toe, that's kind of the thought that I'd like us kind of to enter this evening's discussion. So let's dive into social determinants of health. So these are the topics that make these up. I think for a lot of people, even for us in medicine, these are foreign or somewhat new concepts, because I was telling Cindy and our panelists earlier, like, I didn't learn these in med school. They're taught now in med school. And I think there's a lot more focus going into this, and you'll see why, I think, on the next slide. So let's break these down into what and how they actually impact our health. So let's start up at the top. So these are socioeconomic factors like our education, our educational level, what is our job status if we're at that point in our lives, what is our family support, what is our social support, what are the stresses in that environment, what's our income like, what supports do we have in our community, or what stresses do we have in our community. That makes up 40% of the determinants of health. And that's a huge number. Just think about that. Couple that with our physical environment, that's 10%. So that's, where we live. Do we live in a house or an apartment? How old is the house? What is the surrounding environment like? What's nearby? What's not nearby? What do we have access to? What do we not have access to? All of those things together, 50% of that determines some of our health outcomes, and that can be tied to something as just simple and straightforward as your zip code. And I think that, to me, that's pretty shocking, right? And I hope that kind of shocks all of you too, to say, wow, I never even thought about that. And how do those things interact, and how do those impact my health? So then a 30% chunk comes from our health behaviors. So do we smoke? Do we drink? Do we do those things in moderation if we do them, or in excess? Do we diet? What is our diet like? What foods do we have access to or not? Do we exercise? Couple that with sexual activity, risk factors related to sexual health, and all of those things make up a pretty good sized chunk of our health determinants, just from that alone. And then look here, down at the bottom, we in medicine, physicians, we think we're so important, right? The world just revolves around us, right? No, what a humbling thing for us to see. Look at this, 20% of the determinants of health come from healthcare. And so that's, do you have access to care? And if you do, what is the quality of that healthcare? Only 20% comes from our interactions with the healthcare environment. And to me, that's probably the most sobering fact I have to share with you this evening. So moving on from social determinants, let's talk about CAM. So complementary, not necessarily alternative. Lots of people ask about this all the time, but we want these things to be complementary. We want them to be an addition to standard of care for our lupus patients, not a replacement for standard of care. The thing to remember is a lot of current medical therapies are backed by studies, by science, and by data. So when we are making recommendations for a certain method of treatment, we can share the data that is based on. Most CAM therapies, usually we don't have strong data to back them up. There is some small amount of data in some diseases, but especially when it comes to lupus and other autoimmune diseases, there's really not a lot of data to support us using them or recommending them. And so for those reasons, a lot of your physicians may not be well versed in these topics, and that's okay. I mean, you can still ask, we can go home and do homework and then find an answer for you. So some common questions that I get are of probably most often, is there something more natural, or I wish there was something more natural, but that can be a slippery slope because there's plenty of things in nature that are actually bad for us, right? Poisons come from nature too. So natural isn't always good. That's something to think about. Is there a diet that can help? And we're going to kind of come back to that later. Maybe, I think, is the answer to that. Is there anything else I can be doing? That's kind of what this whole talk is about. And so we'll hit on a few other topics. And then pretty commonly, especially in our school-age kids, what do we do about sports? Can we play our sport full throttle? Do we need to back it off? Do we need to stop completely for a while? That's an individualized question. So here are some cautions about complementary and alternative medicine approaches. So I think you would all know this and think about this, but you want to be aware of anything that's labeled as a miracle or a cure, because we know there currently is no cure for lupus. So approach such a thing with caution. Of course, the old adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, of course. You should be aware that, other practitioners, if they are discrediting conventional medicine or standardized approaches, you need to be suspicious of that. If you come across websites that are offering views that oppose the medical community or standard of care, I think you'll commonly see that they're usually trying to sell you something if that's the case. If they are contradicting the medical community, scroll to the bottom of that page and I think you'll see what I mean. Some additional cautions are that testimonials, meaning, I tried this diet and it worked for me, testimonials like that are not evidence. That's not science. We need large studies where we intervene or not, and then look at the outcomes and see which is better. And I'm pointing that out because for the vast majority of things like over-the-counter supplements, vitamins, herbals, less than 0.5% of the tens of thousands of products out there have actually been studied for safety. And that figure is a few years old. I'm sure that it's many more products than that by now. And here's a quote by a pediatric infectious disease colleague from CHOP. He's written several books, but one of my favorites of his is Do You Believe in Magic? And it's all about these topics. Serious diseases require serious medications. And I cannot think of a disease that fits that more appropriately than lupus. So just think about those things when you're considering, some of these other CAM type of approaches. Some other cautions. So when does CAM become nonsense? So if someone is recommending against conventional therapy that are proven to be helpful, then that is a danger sign. If they're promoting potentially harmful therapy and they're really not discussing the risks and the warnings, then that would also be a red flag. If it's super expensive, that is going to drain your bank account, I would suggest, just running the other way. And then, of course, there are practitioners out there, there are websites out there that may promote this kind of magical thinking where, drink this, take this pill, and, you'll be cured. Again, if it sounds too good to be true, just start backing away or maybe even run the other way. So I'm an everything in moderation kind of guy. So when it comes to these things, I have a lot of patients ask me about these things. Can I or should I do yoga or massage or acupuncture, chiropractics, or, take supplements? I think each of those has to be discussed in its own way and in its own time, what's appropriate for the patient. But this is not an exhaustive list, but I would say patients often ask about these things if they can pursue them because they're interested. I said, sure, check it out. You may find something that works really well for you. And at the end of the day, I think that's the whole point. We want something that you feel is helpful to you and your health. So sometimes I do give some patients and families some rules to think about when they're thinking about, should I do X, Y, or Z? First question is, does it help? Like I said at the beginning, a lot of evidence here is lacking. So we may not know the answer to that question. We may not know that it's helpful because no study tells us so. Does it harm you? Or does it interact with the medications that you take for your lupus? A lot of times we don't know that either because, again, there are no studies for that. So the answer to the first two questions often is unclear and therefore may be unsafe. And then how much does it cost? I've had patients pay $350, out of pocket per month on supplements. And, we have to have a conversation about, okay, do you think those are helpful to you? And, weigh that with the cost. At the end of the day, if you're convinced that something is helping you, I think like a self-fulfilling prophecy, you're going to be right. Conversely, if you've decided that therapy A, B, or C just isn't going to help you, you're probably right about that too. So I think your mindset going into your pursuit of these things is a huge factor, if not the biggest factor. So here's some other terms that you may encounter: your exploration of complementary alternative medicine or adjuncts to conventional medicine. So integrative medicine physicians are MDs or DOs. They're physicians who are trained at integrating these complementary types of approaches with conventional medicine. So kind of like the marriage of both of these worlds. Functional medicine, these practitioners may be MD or DO physicians. They may be trained in other professions or have other degrees. That tends to be more of a CAM and lifestyle approach than it is to conventional medicine. And then some other terms, especially if you're in a part of the country where there are a lot of DOs like me, especially in the primary care settings and family practice. Some of the DOs may have clinics set aside for OMT, that's osteopathic manipulation therapy. And in other parts, it's known by OMM or OPP, but these are spinal and other musculoskeletal adjustments that to a lot of observers may look a lot like chiropractic medicine. So let's move on to nutrition, excuse me. So right now in lupus, there are no proven dietary modifications. Not really anything has been done on a large scale and studied. But I would say, and this is what I tell patients, you know, a lot of people, once you're paying attention to what, even if you're not dieting, once you're paying attention to what you put in your body, I think a lot of people just feel better because you're making healthier choices. You know, people ask about, you know, anti-inflammatory diets. There is evidence that those approaches are useful in some diseases. That has not yet been shown in lupus to my knowledge, but it may be worth exploring. So at the end of the day here with nutrition, you know, my recommendations for my lupus patients are the same as I would make for any other kid. You know, there are, you know, recommendations for, you know, lots of fruits, lots of veggies, whole grains, healthy sources of protein, limited sugar, and, you know, limited processed foods. And lots of good websites out there from the CDC, healthychildren.org, choosemyplate.gov to focus on making healthy choices. In terms of exercise, at least per the American Academy of Pediatrics, the recommendations are that teens need at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise every day. So that means, you know, you're breathing hard, you're breathing fast, you're sweating, you know, you're exercising to the point that you're a little out of breath. And I don't think I have to extol the, you know, virtues of exercise too much, but, you know, we know that these things prevent obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and then there's just a litany of positive attributes otherwise. They improve your concentration, your sleep, they diffuse your stress, they boost your self-esteem, and overall, you feel better once you have exercised. So what does staying healthy even mean? And I think it's helpful in the context of our discussion tonight to kind of frame it based on our social determinants of health and our friend earlier. So in terms of the socioeconomic factors, I think to focus on there would be, you know, what are your sources of social support and family support? What is the education around those groups? What is your own education, especially about your disease? And your health in general? What about your physical environment? Are you safe? You know, do you live in a safe area? What is the stress in your environment like? And what are the strategies you use to manage that stress well? Moving on to health behaviors, this is what we would recommend to most people, but certainly lupus patients too. Avoid smoking or vaping, avoid alcohol use and drug use. For lupus patients in particular, you want to avoid excess sun exposure for sure. And also, you know, we try to counsel our patients on safe sex practices, you know, avoiding sexually transmitted infections and otherwise practicing, you know, safe sex behaviors. When it comes to healthcare, we mentioned before, what is your access to healthcare? And that can include not just access to primary care, but access to specialists, because in many areas of the country, access is limited. In terms of medications, you know, are you taking your medicines as prescribed? And in regards to appointments, you know, are you coming to your appointments or are you missing appointments? So, you know, a lot of behaviors just in the way you interact with the healthcare system can affect your outcomes as well. So when it comes to adapting the family to the diagnosis, there are a lot of tools out there to kind of help us answer the question, what is lupus? Because I think that's the first thing that you're going to get asked. You tell someone you have lupus, they're going to say, probably with a very confused look on their face, well, what's that? What's lupus? So our purple friend here on the screen is a very helpful graphic from the Lupus Foundation. And you can use that and say, look at all these things that lupus can do. Look how many systems in my body lupus can affect. And people begin to understand the complexity of the issue and what all can happen. So it really boils down to education, and then some more education, and then yet more education. And that's not just for yourself so that you know, but also can you teach it to your family? Then you really know that you know it. If you can teach others, teach your family and teach your community and your friends. A couple of other things here. So, living with a chronic disease is a hugely impactful element in a lot of people's lives. And I think that's really a chance to engage with our mental health professionals to help deal with that, cope with that in healthy ways, and wrap our minds around, okay, I'm going to have this for a really long time. How should I feel about that? How should I think about that in healthy ways? And then hope. So lots of reasons to hope in lupus. The main one, I think, is that there are millions upon millions of dollars spent in research every year for new agents in lupus, new research in lupus. Lots of interesting things, coming in the next few years, I think. Another reason is at any given point in time, there's probably 20 to 25 drugs that are being studied for potential use in lupus, like they're in the pipeline right now. And I think, over the past just couple of years, we've seen, new approvals, new agents come onto the market. I think we're going to see a relative explosion of new agents over the next, 5 to 10 years. So that's why I say there's plenty of reason to hope when it comes to living with lupus. And so finally, thinking about reproductive health, birth control related questions in pregnancy. So one thing to think about is when you're looking at your meds and your physicians are counseling you about medications, keep in mind that risks of infertility versus pregnancy risks are different things. One is, does that affect my ability to have children later in life versus, can I or should I get pregnant on this medication, or is it safe to do so? For a lot of lupus patients, we generally recommend to try to limit or avoid completely estrogens because estrogens can flare the disease itself. Again, I will mention, safe sex practices, not just for avoiding sexually transmitted infections, but also for the purpose of, from a birth control standpoint, it can be unsafe for a woman to become pregnant who has lupus if it hasn't been planned and if they're not under really, really good control at the time. And so I do get asked about this pretty frequently too. We should stress that successful pregnancy in lupus is certainly possible, but with a lot of planning, and the disease has to be under very good control at the time. So that's the end of my formal material. I'll add a couple of words here. So at the Heartland chapter here in St. Louis, we have our Young Women's Wellness Workshop coming up in mid-July. And this year, that's a combination of our Summer Jam Youth Retreat and our Transitions Young Women's Workshop. And if you would like more information, scan this QR code here on the screen or go to our website. We do have a limited number of travel scholarships available should you want to attend the workshop here in St. Louis. So thank you for your time and attention. Thank you to the Lupus Foundation for your gracious invitation for me to speak tonight. And with that, I will end and we can move into our panel discussion.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Dr. Dalrymple. That was certainly a lot of information in a short period of time for sure. And now we'll have the opportunity to kind of drill down on that a bit, which will be great. So let's bring in the rest of our panelists. If you guys can start sharing your cameras and we'll get everybody on board here. All right, I think we got everybody. All right, so let's get started. We're going to jump right in with some introductions. And you already have met Dr. Dalrymple. And the one thing that I failed to share in your introduction, though, Doc, is you are also the chair of the board of the Heartland chapter. And that's a really important thing for us as the Philadelphia Tri-State chapter. We work closely with the Heartland chapter. And so we're grateful for your time and dedication and passion, not only in your day job, but also in your volunteer work. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get into introducing everybody. First, we have up Dr. Maria Mascarenas, and she is a pediatric gastroenterologist and nutrition pediatrician in the Division of Gastroenterology, Hepatology, and Nutrition at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which we lovingly call CHOP. She is the director of the Nutrition Support Service, section chief of nutrition in the Division of Gastroenterology and Nutrition, and the medical director of the Clinical Nutrition Department and director of the Integrative Health Program. And we are thrilled to have you here with us, Dr. Mascarenas. So thank you. I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on a lot of things that have just been shared. We also have Adrienne Mayo, who is a volunteer at the Philadelphia Tri-State chapter and a lupus support group facilitator. She has lived with lupus for nearly 30 years, diagnosed at the age of 12 after several years of symptoms. And what we just learned, diagnosed by a veterinarian. So, little fun fact, which you're going, what? She holds an Associate of Arts degree in social science and is married mother of 2 in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, which is out in central Pennsylvania. And last but not least, we have Dr. Jennifer Sherker, who is a pediatric psychologist in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and psychosocial program manager for pain and for the Center of Amplified Musculoskeletal Pain Syndrome, as well as the acquired autonomic dysfunction program at CHOP, which again is Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She has 15 years of experience treating chronic pain and has contributed to work on CHOP's chair initiative on lupus. Additionally, she is overseeing the process for use of biofeedback and clinical hypnosis within the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at CHOP. She is also heavily involved in quality improvement and patient safety work at the behavioral health at CHOP. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, talk about the expertise on this panel. I am honored simply to have you all here with us and for your willingness to share your expertise, your time, your energy, and to share that with our guests tonight and for those who will be viewing this as a recording in the future. So just a reminder to our guests, if you have additional questions, we've got a series of questions lined up, but please feel free to put your questions into the chat or the Q&A. We'll be monitoring those. Just a reminder, we can't do individual treatment or diagnosis questions, but we'll try to hit them as general as possible. And again, a reminder, if you have questions following this program, you can email us at info@lupustristate.org and we'll do our best to get your questions answered. All right, so let's get to it. We're going to jump right in. Dr. Dalrymple shared a lot of information and we have the opportunity to dive just a little bit deeper into some of that information, as well as addressing any other questions that come up, like I said. So we've tried to categorize our questions tonight, and we're going to start off with kind of the preventive health category of the conversation. And Dr. Mascarenas, I'd like to start with you on this. We've heard a lot about different aspects of life that can affect lupus. Why is preventative care so important, especially at a younger age?
Well, I think that the younger age is the perfect time to start establishing good habits and good practices. Because if we can establish that, maybe we may put off disease or not have disease. It's hard to predict. But if we develop good habits, then they will help us if we get sick later on. So I love this pediatric wellness wheel, which is true of adults as well, where you're really looking at nutrition to maintain wellness and prevention, physical activity, sleep. The environment can also influence our health, mind-body practices, spiritual health, also an important part, relationships with each other. And we looked at the social determinants of health. And if you look, many of these are factors on that beautiful slide Dr. Dalrymple showed. So and then the last one is resilience. If we can teach children some ways to be resilient, then when life hits them with knocks, which it hits all of us, they will be more resilient and bounce back. So I think that if we can prevent disease from happening, and if we can pay attention to all these aspects when kids are young, then they will be well equipped to deal with life as they get older.
Resiliency is such an important thing to learn so early in life. And unfortunately, some of us have had to learn it based on early diagnosis and things like that. That lesson comes pretty early. Anybody else, anything you want to add to that? All right, so let's move on. And Doctor, we heard about the social determinants of health, much of which are out of our control. And Adrian, I want to start with you on this because you were diagnosed at a young age, diagnosed at the age of 12, having symptoms many years before that. And you found that things were, and at a young age, what is in your control as a 12-year-old? Probably not much, or at least your parents were telling you that not much was, right? But what can you control and not control in your lupus? I mean, even as a teenager and a college student, getting enough sleep, as a parent now, right? Getting enough sleep as a young parent. How did you try to wrap yourself around getting control of things, and what could you and couldn't you?
Well, I think your focus has to come down to what's the alternative. And that's what it was for me. If I was not getting enough rest, if I was not getting enough exercise, if I wasn't eating properly, what was going to be the alternative of me not doing those things? And I had to get there. Again, as a 12-year-old, you don't want to hear that, cookies and candy and hot dogs wasn't the thing to have. So, you had to, for me, it was learned by experience, because again, I did not learn to eat properly, watch my salt intake and, different things like that until I was an adult. So it's a balance of learning to know your body, learning to know what works for you. I was able to be a cheerleader. I wanted to run track. I wanted to have a future in the Marines. And those were things that I had to learn to adjust as my lupus progressed to other things. So you just have to learn to take control over what you can do and know your limitations.
So well said. Dr. Sherker, how would you advise somebody on that balance of control, not control, especially as a young adult? We think we have control over everything and our parents are telling us otherwise. How do you kind of advise people on that?
It's such a great topic, right? So I think to that point, right, we have to try to figure out what is within our control and what isn't. I think a lot of times we want a certain outcome. And I think just hoping for a certain outcome or wanting, say, to get a lot of sleep is we can't really just snap our fingers, go to bed at 10, wake up at 6 and say, oh, I got 8 hours of sleep. That's great. It doesn't really work like that. So I think it's a lot of the behaviors, the process that goes into what we can control. So, having good sleep hygiene habits and really learning what those are for you, what works for you, what doesn't. I think what Adrian said, I wanted to echo that motivation, realizing why is this important for me? And to really focus on the habits that are the most important for you. I think it can be overwhelming to take on too much at once, to say, I'm going to control everything that I can control. But I think really seeing what works best for you, what areas are most important for you to focus on, and then what are the steps you can take, small ones. I think it can get overwhelming to have too much to think about, but, just daily, is this choice something that will help me or get in my way when I think about that goal that I have in mind? So, whether it's sleeping, healthy eating, exercise, I would also say another big one that I come across is there is so much to manage in life generally, but particularly when you're trying to work through other challenges like lupus, is really making sure to prioritize having fun, prioritize sort of stress relieving activities. Because I think a lot of times we overly focus on just getting our schoolwork done, getting our, different activities done or chores or things that we have to do. And I think sometimes those stress relieving activities go to the side, but they're really important. They give us that sort of reboot, that energy to then take on those other things that are important in life.
Such a good point. It's so important, even if it's a half hour of fun, whatever it is, we sometimes need the reminder. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to take a break from the daily grind. As adults, we need that, right? So anybody else, any other comments on that?
Well, you also have to listen to your body. Like the doctor mentioned earlier, that was most important. that you don't overwhelm yourself with a schedule. Because again, with going to school, and then after school, there was cheerleading practice. And after cheerleading practice, there was chores, there was homework, there was all of these things that had to be done. And, again, as a 12-year-old, I can't say, well, hey, I went to school and I did my cheerleading practice, but now I'm too tired to do my chores. I can't go outside and, again, we were from the country, so we had to get in wood, so we can't get in wood, or I can't wash dishes, so you have to prioritize what's important for you, even if it means, for me, I didn't cheer the whole game. I would cheer into the first quarter, or I would only cheer after the second quarter, but I was able to still maintain and do what I felt was important to me as a teenager at that point. Because, what's not bigger than being a cheerleader when you're in school?
That you're so true. And that is first and foremost in your mind, right? This is my most important thing at this time. And that's what I want to focus on. So, and that's an important thing that you were still able to do that and have those memories and have those opportunities, but you had to figure out how to balance.
You have to learn how to balance, even if it was those times that I could not go on the floor to participate. I may have been just on the bench cheering from the stands. So it's still being involved, because that is not only giving you that physical, but it's also giving you that mental stress that you need.
Well said, that's for sure. Dr. Mascarenas, I'd like to jump over to you as a nutrition expert. We heard a little bit about a lupus diet, right? And the complementary alternative medicines. And we know that there isn't a true lupus diet, but what is out there from a nutrition standpoint that we should really be paying attention to? You hear gluten-free, dairy-free, everybody's trying something different. And obviously, as Dr. Dalrymple said, people, they try different things that might work, you might feel better. Talk to us a little bit about that, the scientific aspect of where we might be going from a diet standpoint, a wellness recommendation for a healthy life with lupus.
So I should start off by saying that there is, in a lot of disease conditions, there are what we call evidence-based guidelines. There aren't in lupus because the data isn't really there. And whatever studies we have are mainly in adults. There's not much in pediatric patients. So clearly an area for more research to be done so we can really better help our patients. I would say with diet, there was a big study, people think, well, if I eat this, will I get this? So there was a big study, the nurses study. I don't know if anyone's familiar with them. These were like 40,000 nurses that were in this longitudinal study where they followed them for years. They looked at many conditions where they looked to see if there was an association with the Western diet and lupus, and they didn't find it. In women in the study, they didn't find it. But there was a very nice review I came across, which actually talked about a balanced diet. We're making sure there wasn't too many calories, so not overeating, not too much protein, having high content of fiber. And we know now that fiber is so important for colonic health and for the microbiome, which is connected now to lots of things in the body, but also making sure that your diet had enough polyunsaturated fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, and all those colorful pigments that are in fruits and vegetables. They call polyphenols. So if you have a diet that's balanced with all these things, that seems to be associated with better outcomes. Again, nothing that's major studies, major dietary interventions, but just associating this with lupus, patients with lupus. I think that, so to go back to what Dr. Dalrymple said is, I think a diet that's balanced, that has a lot of fruits and vegetables, fiber will be important. We now know more, not in lupus, but in other conditions, that what we call a plant-forward diet is very important. So it shouldn't be a meat-based diet. There should be more plant-based proteins and fruits and vegetables. And meat really is, animal protein is used as a condiment as opposed to the main thing. So in general, we're recognizing that these diets are associated with improved health, less inflammation, less cardiovascular diseases. And if we want our children to live healthy lives, then we should start these when they're young. Now, so I think that's what I would say right now is where the evidence really is so far. And in terms of wellness, we know the importance of physical activity. And in adults, there are some studies looking at physical activity. And while it may not improve, may not change disease inflammatory markers, it does improve fatigue, depression, and cardiovascular status. And in patients with lupus, again, in adults, and also improve quality of life. We do know that exercise in general, not so much in lupus, has some anti-inflammatory properties. So could that be applied in lupus? we would need to study that some more. So again, exercise, you talked about wellness components. And remember, I talked about the wellness wheel. So exercise, nutrition are important. Sleep hygiene is very important. No specific studies in lupus, but they've looked at many studies in rheumatological conditions in general. And again, sleep is very important. Psychological therapies, there's very nice evidence that they can help ameliorate disease. And again, this is what integrative medicine is, integrating all these therapies, including sleep, physical activity, with what the doctor's prescribing in terms of medication. So you would never say you could try and address lupus by using these. No, you need your meds and this, and you integrate them all into your care. And I think that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about wellness. But, you know, we're recognizing the importance of relationships as well. And again, that resilience and all that wellness to help you with managing chronic disease, and in this case, lupus.
So, you know, just going back to the diet, nutrition aspect of it, and I'd heard somebody once say, you know, when you're going to try and eliminate something, pick one thing, right? Don't pick 5 things that you're going to eliminate, because you may not know what it was that caused that inflammatory response or that reaction to whatever. But there's so much out there. How do you drill down on that? That and the fact of access to fruits and vegetables for some people can be very challenging, right? That's not eating healthy is often very expensive. I mean, the reality behind it is you go to McDonald's and it's a whole lot cheaper to get a $2 Happy Meal, whatever it is, and these days, but it's a whole lot cheaper. Is how do we try to address some of that for some of our community who may be challenged with actually access to those healthier foods? Do you have anybody have any recommendations?
It's a big problem, access to healthy foods. We know that, and that's something that we need to remedy as a society. You know, there is very good data that in poorer communities, they don't have grocery stores. The big grocery stores don't go there. They have, you know, small corner stores, and the food that you get there, there's not much fresh fruit and vegetable there. So what I tell my patients is buy the frozen fruits and vegetables. You can get them and they're cheaper. And usually because they're frozen, they're collected when they're in prime shape. They're good quality, and that's what you use. So we actually have a lot that we're doing at CHOP regarding what we call culinary medicine, where we have programs for children and their parents, as well as residents and staff, and to help teach people how to cook, because it's amazing. People have forgotten how to cook, and to use simple things and simple ways to get around them. Well, you can use canned stuff, just wash it really well so that you don't get all that extra salt that's put in to preserve it. And I think Dr. Dalrymple said the most important thing was try to avoid processed food as best you can. We can't avoid it 100%, but try to decrease the amount that you get in your diet.
Yeah, that's a great tip. The frozen, the canned, you know, actually just it's so simple. Just rinsing it, right, is from a canned standpoint adds, you know, removes so much of it, and not eating all that other stuff. But I think you have a really good point there, is picking one thing at a time, to change that one thing. If you're going to change your peanut butter, change the peanut butter that you're buying. Try not to change your whole pantry at one time. Is always a great tip for doing things in moderation. It becomes so overwhelming. You're dealing with a chronic disease. You're dealing with multiple physicians in many cases. And now you want me to change everything in my diet. I mean, you want me to exercise, and you want me to do this, and you want me to do that. And by the way, I got to go to school. I got to do my chores, you know, so it's moderation. It's picking one thing at a time, and trying to do that well, and then moving on to another thing, I think is a great model to follow. And I want to jump off of something that you talked about, Dr. Mascarenhas, that you brought up, which is the exercise piece. And Dr. Sherker, I'd like to go to you as a pain management specialist on this. Is, you know, some of us hate to exercise. Some of us love to exercise. Some of us can't exercise based on pain, limited availability. Maybe where we live, it might not be good to go outside during certain times of the year. How do we manage, and what's the best way to really get somebody either started on an exercise program? I think many of us who do exercise, you know, the mental health component, right? For added to all the other physical benefits of exercise, there's a whole mental health component to knowing that you're physically active. But talk to us a little bit about that from your perspective, because I'm sure you see a lot of that from a pain management standpoint.
Absolutely. Actually, the program I work mostly in is all about exercise, and we don't use medication. So I think several different things are important. I think especially for younger kids, natural exercise, meaning we're not going out and trying to run around the track or things like that. It's, dance, play some music, let's, have some fun with it. If there are sort of sports interests or other things that people like to do, get out there and do that. I think the more that ideally a family can, if possible, whoever exists in the house, I should say, can get involved and kind of do it together, or including friends or other people to try to make it more fun and kind of add in that social component can be really helpful. I think when it comes to thinking about going out and exercising, whether again, that's something more fun and we don't feel like it, or maybe it's more formal exercise, I think really paying attention to the thoughts that we're having as we're heading out there. I think it's great to have goals in mind, but I think if we think, oh, I want to go run a mile or something like that, that might be overwhelming for some people. So, you know what, it's better to get out there today and walk a mile than not get out there at all because it's overwhelming, or say, you know what, I'm going to run at least to my stop sign. And then if I can go further, that's fantastic. So I think, really paying attention to the thoughts that you're having and the things that are going through your mind that may not be so helpful in reaching that goal of being, of being active and then trying to sort of make it fun, make it less overwhelming, whatever that block might be. And again, trying to include other people can be helpful. Another thing too can be planning it with other people. So not just calling somebody up and saying, hey, by the way, do you feel like going and doing this today? But, setting a time every day where you're going to go for a walk with a neighbor or a friend or somebody, or, do something that sort of becomes a routine, because that habit can really, really help. And we do build up some endurance and whatnot. I think, there are times that we can't go out and exercise, as you mentioned, because of how we're feeling. I think that can be tough as well, but think about what can I do? So maybe right now, I don't think I can go out and walk, but, can I don't know, do some dance moves while I'm sitting in the chair? Or can I, even, think about playing patty cake with, if you have a little kid in the house, what can I do that's moving? I know a lot of times when I go places, I stand instead of sit, or I'll park a little further from a place. So even just the daily routines that we have, if we don't have a set time that we can go out and do something for whatever reason, ideally trying to set that time. But if we can't, how can you incorporate it into just even the daily tasks that you're doing as well? So those are my thoughts.
Great tips, that's for sure. And I think you lend it to almost some of the things that Adrian was talking about of scheduling it, right? You have to kind of put it into the schedule. You have to plan for it. You have to plan for the downtime. You have to plan for the exercise and become a little bit more organized with our lives in living with a chronic disease. Anybody else, anything to add on that exercise piece?
I think that small changes and even stretching, simple stretches would actually be really good. Even if you have pain and you can't stand up, simple stretches might be good. Yeah.
I think some of, to me, kind of the kind of mind-body exercises, I think of those like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, or low impact things like those, or Pilates, because, not everybody can tolerate or do the same types of exercise. And again, it doesn't have to be anything big or fancy. I think another thing is, kids these days are savvy and they're on social media, and it seems to me like everybody on social media has their own exercise program. So whether it's, Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, there's just tons of free exercise, videos out there, stuff that you can do in your chair at home or on the floor at home or anywhere else in the home. So yeah, you don't have to get out and do anything too formal. I think we all have a lot of access to some pretty good material just in the comfort of our own homes.
Austin, I'm so glad you mentioned yoga, because what I tell kids is go and find the YouTube videos of old lady yoga. You're just sitting and stretching and moving. And that's all that you need,
Yeah.
You don't need a lot of vigorous stuff. You need to do stuff that you can do in that moment, at that time, but movement is really what's important.
Yep.
I had a trainer once share with me a tip of a reminder that even if it's our very worst pain day, our very worst day, and you're just not up to doing anything, even getting out of the chair, that, that mindfulness, that breathing is still movement. Breathing is still movement. So do what you can on that day. And if simply breathing and cleansing the brain, that's a great form of exercise, and that's what works for that day, and we move on from that day. So great tip, that's for sure. And staying on the lines of the preventive thought, Dr. Dalrymple, if you can just talk to us a little bit, are there additional vaccines? Obviously, the COVID vaccine is top of mind these days, right? It's all about the vaccine. Are there other things in addition? We know that the COVID vaccine isn't always approved for everyone, at a certain age, but are there other additional vaccines that people should be paying attention to from a young adult adolescent standpoint that they may not necessarily have paid attention to at this age for somebody without lupus?
Sure. In general, we want all of our patients with lupus to, make sure they're up to date on their age-appropriate vaccinations with their primary care people. We, as rheumatologists who care for patients who are immunosuppressed, we do want everybody, we recommend that everyone gets a seasonal flu vaccine, and people certainly have some varied opinions and feelings about that. And I mean, that's okay, but we continue to encourage that. You're right, Cindy. COVID is on the top of everyone's mind and list of questions these days, and we've been fielding a lot of those questions. We don't have adequate information yet about, use of COVID vaccines in people who are immunosuppressed. Not big studies really, especially in kids, not yet anyway. I'll say that we are encouraging people to get their COVID vaccine as long as their disease is under good control. But it also depends on what medications you're on. And the American College of Rheumatology has guidelines in place currently so that for each individual patient, depending on whether or not your disease is under control and whether or not, or what medications you're on rather, what is the recommendation? Should you get it? Should you wait? Do you have to hold your medicine for a time to get it, etc. But otherwise, in general, pretty much all kids should be getting their age-appropriate vaccines if it's safe for them to receive, as long for the medications that they're on.
Great, thank you. And before we jump off this kind of preventive topic, there's a question in from the chat from our attendees that I think is actually, it's a very good question. I'm not sure we're gonna have the right answer for it, but how important is adequate sleep? Do you think it is important to request a single dorm room in college, or is it better for a kid with lupus to be as normal as possible and share in that college experience of having a roommate?
I'll start addressing, but I want Dr. Dalrymple to answer that one. Sleep is extremely important. Most kids do not get enough sleep. If you don't sleep well, there's a lot of processes, physiological processes that happen at night, and your body kind of resets itself and heals, So if you don't get that sleep, you're in no fit condition the next day to do anything. And poor sleep hygiene does contribute to poor quality of life in patients with chronic disease. So it's very important to sleep well. And most college students don't get enough, high school students don't get enough sleep. They need at least 8 to 10 hours. They don't get that. And so it's very important to get your sleep.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, it's paramount, the importance of sleep. And I think most kids are not getting enough, as Dr. Mascarenhas said. You can easily look up online, based on my kid's age, how many hours of sleep they should be getting. I often direct people to go online and look for tips on sleep hygiene, because they're just frequently in our busy clinic visits. Often there's not enough time to go through the details of that and do it well. So I usually do recommend people look at that. Almost every kid I ask, how much sleep do you get? They really have to stop and think and count up that. And not in the last 6 months have I heard a kid who's getting an adequate amount of sleep. I mean, it's just a huge problem. In terms of, the college situation, yes, I agree. A lot to be said of having the kind of normal, regular, common college experience. No one would argue the value of that. In terms of whether or not it's appropriate for a patient with lupus, to share a room, I think that largely depends on the individual. What is your health like at the time? What medications are you on? In terms of, part of that is also thinking about health risks as well. So yeah, we couldn't talk enough about sleep So important. We could have like a 3-hour conference about that and go over. Yeah.
Maybe that'll be our next topic on the webinar, sleep.
I can tell you, as a child growing up, I used that to get my own room. Growing up with 4 siblings, I had to share a room with my sister. And after being diagnosed and finding some information about lupus, I did, mention my sister who may wanted to stay up late to read a book or watch TV or talk on the phone or do something that I needed my rest. And for my mental health, I needed my own space. So.
And how did that work out for you, Adrian?
I got my own room.
Oh, nice. There's a tip to everybody watching. There's lobby for your own room. That's great.
Again, you have to be your own advocate.
That, you know what? So true. And what a lesson to learn at a young teenage age. That's for sure. It starts at home, right? Don't they say it starts at home? So true. Wonderful. All right, let's switch gears just a little bit to the coping and mental health aspect. Living with a chronic disease brings many issues, let alone the disease itself, right? There's all this other aspect of other things we need to pay attention to and questions like, should we have a roommate in college? But, just even talking about the disease itself, like literally talking about the disease with others. Adrian, how do you or did you initially talk to others about your diagnosis? Some people are very free with their information, others not so much, feeling uncomfortable, which actually goes to our attendees question, living a normal life as possible. How many people do you tell? How'd you deal with that?
To me, I was comfortable. I'm a talker, as you see. So in order to get the things that I felt that I needed, whether or not it was in high school, whether or not, once I got to the college level, I had no problem telling people that I had lupus. It allowed me to explain to them and tell people what lupus is, because a lot of people, as the doctor mentioned, have not heard of it. So to be able to say, hey, I have lupus and this is what it is and how this is affecting me and this is what I need. You have to have that conversation, because if you don't tell people what you need to assist you through life, then you're going to be left behind, you're going to be left out, and you're not going to get the things that you need to get.
Very good point. Dr. Sherker, what recommendations do you give to patients for that? You're dealing in a pain, in a pain management situation and some other things that you're directly working with. Do you have any specific recommendations around that?
Yes, and I would echo what Adrian said with regard to, knowing yourself and really how comfortable you are telling other people. I think a lot of people do want people to know. Some people really don't. And I think that has to be a personal choice. I think relationships are, that sort of onion model of relationships. There are people that are really close to us and they're going to know what's going on. That could be our, immediate family and other people. And then we have layers. And I think thinking about, who you're talking to and what message you want to send, I think it's really important to have confidence that this is your personal information and you don't have to share anything. So, you can share as much as you want to or as little as you want to. And if you share some and people have a lot more questions and you get to the point where you're sort of at a point where I don't want to answer that question, it's too personal for our relationship. It's okay to sort of not answer that. There's a technique I typically recommend called the broken record technique, which is you sort of answer the question as much as you want to. And then if they keep asking, you just repeat the last answer that you gave. And eventually they stop asking. They realize you're not going to answer it. And because every time you give more information, then that comes, 3 more questions or 5 more questions. And then those, it becomes a trickle down. And I think thinking about, how is this information going to be used? And do you feel comfortable with the people around you knowing, that information? And I think to Adrian's point, I think thinking about, the balance between what is lupus versus what do I need? You may feel more comfortable describing the diagnosis in more detail with some people, but the bottom line is you're really, sometimes people can get lost in those details. And I think the most important piece is really, what do you need in this particular situation from this person or from these people around you? What do they need to know in order to help you or help you cope through a certain situation?
Well said. Thank you. Anybody else comment on that? All right. Dr. Mascarenas, you're the director of the Integrative Health Program at CHOP, and we heard a little bit from Dr. Dalrymple as far as the alternative therapies, acupuncture, chiropractic care, all of that other good stuff. Can you speak to that as far as, how do we integrate all of that? How would you recommend to somebody to approach that? Talking to your doctor first. I want to try this. I want to try that. Can you just kind of touch on that a little bit as to maybe direction, how to get started or what to be really mindful of in addition to some of the thoughts that Dr. Dalrymple already shared?
I think the biggest thing is to have an open relationship with your physician and to discuss what you're considering, what you're thinking with your physician, because he or she is probably the best person who can help you with those decisions and with recommending what's safe and what's not safe. I think that's the biggest thing as physicians. We want, we're open-minded, we want to help our patients, but also we want their safety. So if you're going to take something that might interact or interfere with the therapies and be detrimental to your health, we don't want you to do that. So I think that there's not much evidence in lupus about these modalities at all, but we know from other disease conditions that acupuncture can really be good in some patients for helping with chronic pain. So if that's something that you're interested in, then you talk to your physician and they might connect you with a reputable person in the community, or give you some advice. And the NCCIH, which is the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, that's through the NIH, they have a very nice website with basic information on how do you choose a practitioner, what to look for if you're going to go down that route. So talk to your physician. You can go to the NCCIH website, again, very useful. But I think acupuncture, mindfulness, yoga, clinical hypnosis, massage, again, by the right practitioner who's experience in your condition, because even for yoga, you're not going to go to a regular yoga therapist. You want to go to someone who's in essence a medical therapist. So we have those people at CHOP, and they actually will adjust regimens and yoga sessions for the patient to meet them where they are that day and specifically to help them. So you really want to go to someone who's experienced in the area, who's able to do that, not to any yoga class, etc. So I think that really the best thing is to talk to your provider, because then they can help direct you. And we're lucky that we have amazing acupuncturists and yoga therapists and massage therapists at CHOP who can provide that kind of care.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as Dr. Dalrymple said, it's complementary, not competing or alternative, right?
Correct.
It's not substituting.
No.
That's for sure. And I'm sure, Dr. Sherker, you must get a lot of questions about this just from a pain management standpoint of, and I'm sure some people have the mindset of, I need to try and reduce my medication. I don't want to take more medication, the more pain I'm in. How do you address any of that in your area?
So yeah, I think I may have mentioned before in our actual treatment program, which is very different. We don't use medication, so I'm very used to sort of helping people reduce medication and cope in different ways. Obviously, with lupus and other chronic pain conditions, medication is a part of treatment. But thinking about what are those other approaches that can be helpful, I work very much from a CBT framework, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's that link between thoughts and feelings and behaviors, and also instead of frequently it's referred to as sort of a cognitive triangle. I like to call it a diamond, because all of those things are influencing, as we've already talked a lot about today, the way our body is functioning. So I always honestly start right with thoughts. Are the thoughts that we're having helping us in this moment? So if I keep saying to myself, this is hurting me, or this is hard, or this is painful, that is probably not a helpful thought in whatever goal you have. And again, I when I say goal, it's realistic based on kind of where you are in this moment, what you can accomplish. But I think if we have those more pain-focused thoughts, we are going to feel that pain more, and it's going to be harder to function through that pain in the ways that and really, that are going to bring us that quality of life we're looking for. So instead, paying attention to the thought of, this may be difficult or this may be painful, and here's a strategy I'm going to use, or I'm going to break it down in this way, or this goal is really important to me, so even though I have pain, I'm going to put that aside, and accept that that's there, and still try to enjoy the best I can these other things that that I have sort of going on in my life and that I want to do. So paying attention to the thoughts, I think absolutely from that's the cognitive piece. I think from paying attention to our breathing and other types of relaxation strategies, visualization, mindfulness-based strategies. So a lot of sort of relaxation types of things that we can do, behaviors in which we can engage that can help us relax as well. And that can influence the way we're thinking about things. Distraction can be very helpful. I don't like to just go right to distraction though. While it is very helpful, I think those thoughts, I describe like a smokestack. And I think if we distract ourselves, it's like we're constantly pushing the smoke aside, but we want to really pay attention to the thoughts that are sort of driving that up to begin with, so that we're not working so hard. If we can learn to think in a way that's really generated by those helpful thoughts and or catch those more negative thoughts, I think it becomes easier to then engage in distraction afterwards if we're still struggling in some way. But goal setting is a big piece of that too.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I'm just going to pause for a second. I'm going to remind everybody we are recording. We are going slightly over our time, but I want to keep this conversation going because there's still so much information that we want to just touch on for a few more minutes. So we are recording. So if you do have to leave us, please, watch for the recording. And we appreciate you being with us tonight. But and staying in that same line of thought from the alternative therapies, Adrienne, as a lupus warrior, right? You've been living with lupus for many years now. How did you deal with and have you gone into any of the alternative therapies and utilize some of those other practices from your perspective? How did you analyze them?
Well, first, let me just piggyback a little bit off of what Jennifer said. I love what she said about being in the positive mindset, because that's one of the things that I had to do as a child. I remember those days that I did not want to get up out of the bed. And, and like you said, you have to do basically what your parents tell you to do as a 12 and a 13-year-old. My mother had rheumatoid arthritis, and so we had a wheelchair ramp onto our home. And those days that I did not feel like getting out of the bed, I was hurting. Again, I wanted to lay there and say, I'm in pain. I don't want to get up. I don't want to do this. And she would come to the room door and she would say, hey, no matter how bad you feel, there's always someone who feels worse. So this is what I want you to do. She would have me put on a fashion show for her. Again, I had 4 sisters. So they would grab clothes out of their closet and we'd walk up and down the wheelchair ramp like we were on a runway to make it positive. And again, just switching up from getting out of that bed, putting on clothes, putting on makeup and walking up and down that ramp made me feel better. So it is all about that positivity with the mind. So again, sorry, Cindy, I went off on a tangent there.
No, I love it. That's perfect. I love it. It ties in beautifully. That's fantastic. And I just have this image of you up and down the ramp and I love it. I think it's fantastic.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I addressed the question or not.
That's okay. No, we're good. I like the way you responded anyway. And I'm gonna just shift gears here really quickly, just because there's a question in the Q&A that I want to hit and I'll open this up for anybody who wants to jump in. Do you recommend college students get a special accommodations like a 504 plan?
I can jump in. I think probably, that's very individualized depending on what the child or student, I should say, needs at that time. I think it can be helpful to make sure that the powers that be at the school know what medical needs may be there or other needs may be there. But I do think it's probably not a one size fits all for every person. But I'd love to hear from my colleagues as well.
I agree with that. Not as a blanket for everybody. For all of my patients with any chronic disease, lupus included, I do not suggest that they all do that, because really, you have to kind of have reasons, to put on those forms for those accommodations. I have limitations with A, B, and C, and therefore I need accommodations X, Y, and Z. So in that way, it's very individualized. One other way to look at it is, maybe they had a 504 or an IEP in, grade school. Do we continue that in high school? Do we continue that in college? I think that depends on what's going on in your life at the time and what, if any, barriers do you even maybe anticipate? Because sometimes it is good to have it in place. almost like a safety net in a way to say, well, what if I get halfway through the semester and I get sick and I have to cut back? You do have some leeway and in a way some protection there to help deal with that situation. So yes, I agree. It really does have to be kind of based on an individual patient at the time.
Who's the best person to help you make that decision? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I mean, to me, I think it's kind of between your rheumatologist and your primary care person.
Okay.
Not all of our patients, I tell everybody every day, you're allowed to have more than one problem, right? And so, lupus may not be the only thing on your plate, right? And if you do have another chronic disease or, condition that affects your education, then maybe somebody else is the better person to drive that process if there are other reasons that you need a 504 or an IEP.
Great point. Thank you. Thank you for the question too from the audience. That was great. And so I'm going to kind of turn back to the coping aspect and things that we do to get through each day. And Adrian, you have this lovely perspective of hindsight, right? You're an adult, looking back, and you've had some, I think what you've shared just from a positivity standpoint and some of the things that you learned very early on. But what has really changed for you of how you kind of treat yourself, right? Caring for yourself now as an adult versus maybe, even as a teenager, young adult, what's really changed for you that you might be able to share with people that you would have said, had I done this back then?
For me, it was two things. It was mindset, which I think was the most important, thing that I had to wrap my mind around. Okay, if I want to have any quality of life, this is what I need to change. I need to be more of a positive outlook. Again, coming from the area that I came to when I did not know a lot about lupus other than it was a diagnosis. Hey, you have lupus. At that point, and again, imagine being 12 and being told that the lifespan was 10 years. So that could have pushed me into a depression as a young kid of, okay, well, they're basically telling me I have about 10 years to live, so let's go wild. So, instead, as I grew older and learned more about it, it became changing, again, how I exercise. It changed how I, eat and how I take care of my body. That was the main thing. And it was, again, staying positive while I made those changes, whether they were big changes or whether they were small. It was the point of knowing, even from that little girl who didn't want to get out of the bed then to the 44-year-old woman who still does not want to get out of the bed now, knowing that I have to do it. And whether or not it is, okay, we're going to lay here, we're going to take a breath. We may even turn on some motivational music first before we get up. But it's taking those steps of knowing what I need to do in order to accomplish today. And I had to learn that.
Yeah, the beauty of perspective and experience, that's for sure. Thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Sherker, looking at this from a parent perspective, I'm sure we've got parents on the call out there on the program tonight. How can a parent best, we're in a global pandemic, how can a parent really help a child who's feeling depressed, who really, really struggles to get out of bed for a whole host of reasons, especially, we're in this isolation period and we've been in it for so much longer than any of us anticipated. What advice do you give for parents?
I think it's really important to normalize for kids that it's okay to feel sad, that it's not surprising if you start to feel depressed, which is more that extended period of sadness. And so that it becomes okay to talk about. I think really being aware of your own feelings about how, obviously as a parent, you're caring for your child. It's hard to see your child struggle in some way, but I think being present, listening to your child, asking more questions than telling kids what to do, and really try to understand what's going on for that child. I think a lot of times parents make some assumptions. Sometimes, at least I do, I'm a parent, and sometimes I'm like, oh, this is why my child's struggling. And it's like, wait a minute, actually, it might be something totally different. And I think, years of experience have helped me shift that way of how I talk to my own kids when they're depressed. And I think, you point out not only are there, medical kind of challenges, but we have this this global pandemic right now that makes it even more challenging. I think, understanding what your child needs, what they're looking for, and I think shifting from a problem to a solution is something I do pretty much in every aspect of my work. So thinking about, okay, I am missing social contact. Well, maybe I can't go out and be present physically with people, but I'm sure we've seen a lot of Zoom parties and social distance outside type parties, and being creative about playing games together, but through social platforms. I actually went and bought laser tag, which I don't know how many people enjoy that, but I think it's fun because it's a distance thing. So we're outside, and no matter how fast or slow you move, it can be kind of a fun way to be moving a little bit, and be able to be sort of with people. But I think as a parent too, prioritizing emotional health as much as we prioritize the medical. I think, again, a lot of times there's a focus on, we've got to go to this doctor's appointment, or we have to go to that doctor's appointment. And sometimes I find that the psychology appointment is the last one to get scheduled because there are so many other important, pieces to care. But I think it's important to emphasize that the emotional health is every bit as important as the physical health side of things. I think it's also important for parents to realize that depression in kids especially can kind of present in multiple forms. So kids that are feeling depressed don't always show the typical signs. Certainly if you do see somebody that's looking sad, crying a lot, losing interest in activities, not enjoying things in the same way, that's a good signal that you might want to check in with your child. But sometimes it's coming out as irritability, or more short temper, or difficulty with sort of coping. And so again, I think asking and what how kids are doing, and prioritizing that help. I also think for parents, again, to be able to have the conversation with their kids, and be able to tolerate their own distress as kids are talking about the distress they're in. I think it's important for parents to get their own support if they, if you need support in coping as well. And sometimes even family therapy can be helpful so that everybody can sit down and talk about what's going on. I think sometimes kids have a hard time when you're dealing with a chronic illness. Many kids have told me, I don't want to burden my parents more with what's going on. And I think, having a neutral facilitator within that family therapy environment, or within an individual therapy context, but bringing in the parents or other siblings as well. Siblings have a lot of feelings as well. So I think just paying attention, being open, and really wanting to hear from the child what's going on, and not making a lot of assumptions.
Yeah, no, good point. And even just as we think about teenagers and the age, right? The age is just lends itself to some anger and frustration, and from the teens part. So it's from a parent perspective, it's really hard to understand what really is going on. And so those conversations are so critically important to have in that open dialogue. And we all know that teenagers will shut down on us, and as parents we have to continue to press. So parents, hang in there. I've got 20 somethings, and it does get better. That's for sure. And they can be challenging times. And just in those same notes, Dr. Sherker, at what age do you think, any kind of therapy, family therapy, psychotherapy, at what age does that become appropriate? Is there an age?
Yeah, I mean, I think the type of therapy depends, age is dependent on the type of therapy. So even young kids can really benefit, both from the standpoint of engaging in play therapy and things like that, but also a lot of the younger kids' therapy will include support for parents, structuring days, structuring activities, again, thinking about sleep-wake schedules and meal planning and things like that. So some of it is really in getting to know the child, being able to then give support to the parents and recommendations, how to work with the child, how to structure behavior plans, things like that, if those types of things are needed. But for the younger kids, play, you see a lot of what the child might be struggling with that they can't necessarily articulate. I think art therapy can also be really helpful for younger kids as well. I think the cognitive, more CBT-based therapy is going to be shifting into that probably 9, 10, 11 years old, something like that. I think family therapy, again, I would think around that same sort of age time, maybe even a little bit younger than that, would be a helpful age group.
What do you recommend somebody, go for those services? Someone who may not be in the Philadelphia region have access to the amazing services at CHOP. So how do you recommend somebody start that process? Where do they go? Who do they talk to? Where's that initial conversation start if you want to get into some form of therapy?
Sure. Typically, I would recommend, asking at the school if you're comfortable. If you're attending school, they may have worked with therapists before. Again, maybe for more general things, I think more specific medically related therapy supports. I think physicians, primary care physicians are often very good resources. But generally, I also think about, going through insurance. If you have insurance that can give referrals, foundations, often have really nice resource lists as well. But I think also word of mouth, asking if you're comfortable, again, the degree to which you're comfortable reaching out and saying, this is what I'm looking for. But you can also go online. There's Psychology Today and websites where you can also get some nice background and search and sort of see what you're looking for. You can often search, if I'm looking for health related supports or depression or anxiety or those types of things, you can often find. But I think the most important thing is not necessarily whether it's, say, a psychologist or a social worker or whatever, somebody that provides the type of therapy you need that works with the right age group. So for kids, you'd want to find somebody that's versed in working with pediatrics. But I think the most important thing, honestly, is the comfort level that you feel like you can talk to this person and that you're comfortable talking to them, because they can be the most skilled person in the world. But if you're not going to feel comfortable sharing what you need to share with them, it's really not going to help. And on the other end too, if you can talk to them, but you're not actually, you're talking about the weather. I think having a direct conversation to say, these are the goals that I really want to be working on. And if that person's not able to challenge you, I think that could be a time to look for a different provider as well.
And there's a question in the chat I want to hit really quickly, and then we'll start wrapping things up. But have you heard any about the benefits of omega-3, 6, and 9 in persons with lupus?
So when I talked about the diet, the review that I read, they talked about the presence of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which belong in that category. In a mouse model, fish oil was helpful in lupus, but there are no good studies in patients with lupus. So we are not mice, but there's a suggestion that it might be helpful in a mouse model. But there are no studies that I could find in human beings.
Great, thank you. All right, and I just want to touch really briefly, but it's not a brief topic by any means, but as I look at the time, and I'm going to be mindful of your time and what you're giving to us tonight, because we're so grateful. I'd really like to just touch on the access and access to care and social determinants of health. Kind of, again, it's not a brief topic, but just kind of hit some of this. Dr. Dalrymple, and you brought this up in your presentation, and it was it's so eye-opening to see the broad factors that we do and don't have control over. But as a physician, how do you address social determinants of health with your patients in an effort to recognize them and help overcome them? I know it's challenging.
Well, that's tough. As I thought about that, I realized that I think it most often comes up with the questions that patients and family members ask more than anything I do. I think it's, I'm a teenager with lupus. I'm trying to work and go to school. How do I manage this stress? This is going on in my family. This is going on at school. And so it kind of comes in the interactions with the school, home, family, community environment, and how do we approach those things in healthy ways more than any, exhaustive list of questions that we as providers might have for them. One way to address some of those challenges, as they come up would be supports we've mentioned already, like social workers may be able to help interface with community resources. Our mental health colleagues may also be able to help interface with resources to help manage some of those things. So that's where I see it kind of coming in most commonly.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I think from a psychology perspective, I think it's important to, at least the work that I would do with people that I'm treating, would be to help help patients themselves advocate, let people, or at least be open to sharing, here are the struggles I'm having. I think sometimes it can feel like medical visits are rushed, or, there can be some things that are embarrassing, that are difficult to do and hard to talk about and whatnot. But I think finding the words and finding the I don't know, the bravery to speak up and say, this is a struggle for me and I need help. Because I think, we are talking about whole people. It can't just be about going and getting this medicine tweaked or that done. It's really, well, what if I can't buy my medicine? How do I get the supports to get that medicine and then be able to have a regular regimen, because I'm also working and I'm also doing all these other things. I think really helping people to think about and encouraging people to think about what are the challenges in actually doing the things that I'm being asked to do from a medical care standpoint or emotional care standpoint. And again, I really encourage leaning on psychology supports as well, or behavioral health supports, to help both figure out what those challenges are, because sometimes we just feel overwhelmed and we know something's hard and we just want to put it aside. But I think, I like those finger traps that you have where, when you the harder you pull, the tighter you get stuck. And I think, a lot of the work I do is thinking about leaning into those problems, really admitting that, yes, these are challenges, these are problems, and let's understand why they're problems so that we can reach out, get help to find the resources that we can benefit from to hopefully untangle them at least a little bit, or at least start small, figure one thing out that we can make a little bit easier.
Great points. It's a reminder that to be our own advocates, how important it is to speak up for ourselves, to bring those things to the table, no matter what it is, because you just don't know what opportunities are out there to receive help, to know when it's not possible for everybody to know what all the resources are. And so we just have to ask, we have to be our own advocates. And I think you shared that earlier, Adrian. It's so important to advocate for yourself. So I would love to continue this conversation for hours, and because I think there's still so many topics that we could cover, but unfortunately, I think we do have to wrap it up. But I just want to offer it up to anybody. Are there any final thoughts? Is there anything that you want to share with our attendees and our future attendees that maybe we didn't get to tonight?
I'll just share one thing, that nutrition is a key part of any regimen, but you need to really work with your team. And if you teach your children good nutrition habits, they will always come back to this later in life because they realize how well they felt. And so it's really important for us as parents to set a good example.
Thank you. All right. Well, like I said, we could keep going for hours, but thank you so much, Dr. Dalrymple, Dr. Mascarenas, Dr. Sherker, Adrian, for your time tonight, your sharing, your experiences, your expertise. A lupus diagnosis is certainly a journey for every part of the family, and we appreciate you sharing a small part of your journey with us tonight, and in every aspect that you bring to the table from this lupus community, because it is it takes a village, right, as they say, to bring all these pieces together, and there's still so much for people to learn about lupus. So as a reminder, if you have additional questions that maybe we didn't get a chance to answer tonight, please shoot us an email at the Philadelphia Tri-State Chapter at info@lupustristate, and we'll pop that in the chat one more time. Watch for the recording, and we'll get this shared out with your local chapter as well as the Philadelphia Tri-State Chapter. And again, thank you to all of you who joined us tonight, for being with us tonight, and for your great questions through the chat and the Q&A. And to our panelists, my hats off. You guys are fantastic. Thank you. I look forward to future programs and connecting with you again. Whether you're in the Heartland chapter or the Philadelphia Tri-State Chapter, we're all one lupus community, and I'm grateful. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you at our next program. Take care.